Perfectly hidden depression. What is it and why is it more important than you think? For this episode of the Story of Our Trauma podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Margaret Rutherford, host of the popular Self-Work podcast, and a Harvard classmate, Crescent Muhammad, both extraordinary women with extraordinary insights on trauma, both of whom showed up with vulnerability for this conversation. I'm excited to share this one. It's relatable for anyone who has hit a wall, whether professionally or personally. Let's drop into the conversation. I'd like to start with you, Margaret. If you can give us a sense of when you started questioning the conventional criteria for depression, and tell us about your concept of perfectly hidden depression.
I'll be more than happy to. I actually had some experience with this with some patients, probably 20 years ago, but unfortunately light bulbs didn't go on until, maybe they did sort of on an unconscious level, but back in 2014, I was blogging and I wrote this post about some of the people that I had seen that when they walked in my door, they would never have said they were depressed. They would have denied it, in fact, fervently. But then of course, with treatment, I learned that they were indeed hiding a lot of trauma and sadness and even despair. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote about them. I called the post, "The Perfectly Hidden Depressed Person, Are You One?" Well, I'd never had anything go viral before. And by damn, this thing went viral. And then it was on the Huff Post because I was writing for them at the time. And I got hundreds of emails saying, "It's like you're in my head. How do you know this?" And so I kind of stumbled upon it, frankly. I don't think we ever talked about perfectionism in graduate school. It was not something that was on my front burner when I worked with people necessarily. So I started looking around and saw, of course, I found Brene Brown for some reason. I didn't know who she was. I must have been living under a rock. And then Terrence Real had written a really good book about covert depression. But I'm sort of the ilk, well, if it's not out there, create it yourself. And so I had to bolster my own sense of competence. But I read a lot of academic literature. And so perfectly hidden depression is basically when a perfect seeming life, when someone has gone through trauma of some kind, it could be various, very diverse forms of trauma as a child, and how they unconsciously choose to handle it is to begin to create this perfect looking persona, this perfect looking life. I guess psychodynamic people would have said it a false self a long time ago. But anyway, and it gets solidified into this way of being that is based on pushing away all kind of painful emotions, any kind of memories of things, denying it, discounting it with a very rigid compartmentalization, and then working very hard to look perfect, to seem perfect, both to themselves and to other people.
A lot of people that Crescent and I went to school with at Harvard probably suffer from this. It seems like it would be something that would affect people from all backgrounds and walks of life. Crescent, does this term resonate with you at all?
It does. It's funny because the trauma element of it is not something I've given a lot of thought to. For me, and this is what I've shared, and this is a recent conversation that I'm comfortable having. I really think prior to this year, I would have it with my very small group of friends, but not something I was comfortable yet sharing publicly. Look, the pandemic has taught us all a lot about what's important, but and I do think there is the racial component. I'm African American, if you're listening, and for me, there was I was like, I'm not allowed to be depressed. I've had all these opportunities, and I'm just having a bad day. Like, this is something I have to power through, this feeling of heaviness and dark thoughts. I just have to power through because there's too much riding on me and what I represent to my community for me to fall apart. I don't have time for that. So that's
a young woman I worked with last year or the year before last, who is also African American, and she said It's like we were supposed to be the first. We were the first of this, the first of that, and needed to look all that put together. And frankly, if I hadn't looked that perfectly put together, I wouldn't have been chosen for things because of my race.
Absolutely.
And I think this connection with trauma is sort of a link here, because one of the universals that I've seen with trauma is this feeling of I don't deserve to suffer or to be cared for because of my suffering. I just have to power through or not see myself in the frame of being somebody who has been damaged or suffered from trauma.
And the trauma element, as I was preparing to speak with you both, I did think back to what I consider to be my first major depressive episode. Mm-hmm. And it happened in high school after a breakup. Mm-hmm. That just left me legitimately devastated for months on end. And, it was one of those things, again, I got through it. And then it happened again with another breakup in law school this time. Uh-huh. And again, devastation. And so, I've since been able to chart situations that are triggers for me and how best to navigate. But it's not, again, you're in high school. I didn't look at it as a traumatic experience in those words. I'm like 16, but again, in hindsight, it was a hugely triggering element. And again, as I looked back, there were other moments, but that one was huge. And a dark hole. So
actually, you're in really good company, because we haven't published this podcast episode for our Harvard 25th reunion series, but the next one is one that I interviewed for. And in that, I talked about some research I collected back in 2008, after many of us were kind of just graduated, starting our lives. And I did this survey of over 1,200 women, mostly Harvard graduates. And I asked them, is there any event in your life that has made you a much less trusting person than you were before? I was trying to get at trauma, not in the sort of conventional way, because a lot of people have a difficult time seeing themselves as having been traumatized for the reasons you just said. Right. So I asked it in a different way to really get at that. And over 50% of them had. And then I asked them, what was that event that made you a much less trusting person than before? It was a relationship trauma. That was the most common at that time in our lives, the most common developmental trauma that occurred to these over 1,200 women, mostly Harvard graduates. So I'm absolutely in the camp that relationship breakups are not only one of the hardest forms of heartbreak and grief, but can change the way we think about life, about relationships, about everything. What do you think, Margaret?
Well, and especially most likely that relationship had painful, negative, dark elements to it in the first place. I mean, it's not that breakups with someone that you fall in love with and then y'all grow apart or something like that, or there's an amicable split. This is, I've worked with several people who will describe their relationship as with someone who was sexually abusive to them, or someone who was fairly manipulative, and then the breakup becomes about, this, I think the popular nomenclature for it right now is trauma bond. It's there was a great deal of investment in, I've got to save this relationship. I've got to be who this person needs me to be. And so when it breaks off, that there is a true, that the both partners were, or one partner was trauma bonded to the other. And so when there is a breakup, my guess would be that how significant it is because of part of the nature of the relationship itself. That totally makes sense. I will say, as far as the first one, that wasn't it. What I realized later is that it was the rejection factor. Mm-hmm. I love hard. I've since learned about myself and really, when you have a particular type of connection with someone that is special and rare, and then it ends, and you didn't want it to end. So in that instance, it was really like a really good relationship. We were just very young and sort of making decisions, as 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds do, but it was someone that I saw a future with. And all of a sudden that future is no longer going to happen. Right. And so now I'm managing that. The second one was definitely a relationship that had some problems, not hugely,
big issues. But again, this was law school, but someone I've been dating since college. And so again, there was a future that I had planned out that now is no longer. And so now I'm reshifting. And it wasn't just those are just ones that like were major. I thought about how, if I wanted to share this part or not, but I remember different times what I would call my grumpiness, or really, and I'm going to say this, what I call wanting to kick a squirrel. I've never kicked a squirrel. I just never understand that. I know that I've never done that. I do not harm animals. I don't even like squirrels. I wouldn't even get close enough to a squirrel to kick one. But it was just grumpiness that would overtake me. Yeah. And I remember I would always think like, okay, I'm in a bad mood. I need to deal with this. Like, let me go for a walk or let me figure it out. And I didn't necessarily know where. I didn't have the time and the tools then to analyze why am I in this bad mood. It was just descend on me. And it wouldn't last very long. And, and I would move on from it. And so when the breakups happened, it was that dark mood that just lasted for weeks, months at a time. And then, and I do want to go back to law school when I first thought, when I was at my law firm and first sought therapy, because that was a very definitive moment. But along the way, when my father passed away, that was hugely, obviously traumatic. And that's actually when I said, okay, I need to take medication. And up until then, I had therapy, but I resisted medication. I was like, no, I don't have to take pills for the rest of my life. No, I don't want that. And when in that moment, that traumatic experience, I was like, yeah, you need to.
Yeah. Well, Crescent, there's two types of people in the world. People who have sometimes wanted to kick a squirrel, and liars. Liars. I think, feel like what you describe in kind of that like amusing way is like a feeling that a lot of people have had, just this like welling up of just anger and irritability, that has to do with darker stuff, right? Trauma. And, I definitely want to back you up on, although I agree, Margaret, that a lot of relationships have a lot of dark tones to them. Just the realization that someone is not going to be that person you thought you saw a future with, is a trauma. Is like, what does that mean about who I am, my identity, my desirability, my acceptability? All of that stuff comes up for us. And I've been in that place too, of losing a relationship and having those same questions. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Margaret, go.
No, I think that, it's very interesting. I'm sitting over here thinking, wow, I've never, I have certainly talked with people who have identified with trauma-based perfectionism and that their trauma was not as a child, but was at a more formative period in their lives, like in college or something. And so, but this is an interesting take in that you're saying that, of course, you already had the racial inequality and then maybe there's something about, I don't know, the rejection on top of that in a relationship. I don't know. There's I would wonder if there's a thread there.
And maybe I think now just kind of sharing, just generally speaking, like bullet pointing my journey, I've probably until this point. Again, as Shauna noted, we went to college together. So Harvard undergrad, I went to UPenn for law school. So great education. I legitimately come from a very loving and supportive family. I've never questioned, not having the support of family and friends, never been homeless, never was concerned about, at least baseline financial matters. Now that I'm adult, it's a little different. Like financial stability is definitely like an issue, but I'm surviving, I'm fine. But in law school, that second relationship ended and it ended bad. And I'm questioning everything. I'm like, okay, what's going on with my life? Up until that point, academics were my safe spot. I always excelled academically, right? So no matter what else may have been going on, relationships, whatever, this was my area where I shined. Yeah. So now I'm in an environment, law school, where I'm like, yeah, I don't really like this. This is not what I thought it was going to be. Sure. And so now one area, the relationship I thought I was going to marry this man, that's blown up in a way that was horrible. Like I was lied to and just lots of nonsense. And also on where my safety, where my comfort zone is, where I go to when everything is bad. I'm like, I have this. I don't have. I'm like, I'm doing well in law school, but I I don't like it. It's not a, and I don't say easy path. It's just not a comfortable path. And it's first year of law school. Everyone says that about law school. First year of law school sucks, right? And I'm like, yeah, but this is a little deeper than just sucking. I'm just legitimately not happy. And so I was on the fence about going back after that summer. Like I took my summer came and I was like, do I want to go back to school? I'm not sure because I'm not happy. And so, and even at that point, I was like, yeah, what you gonna do? Drop out of law school, be an actress? Girl, please. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not realistic for me, right? I'm a Black girl, working class family, have this access to this great education. There's a path that I need to stay on. And I'm very pragmatic. So that's where that factors in. So I finish law school, I get to the law firm. This is where the key thing that happens is I lose control over my schedule. I have no control over my schedule. I'm now beholden to the partner says stay late. The partner says work this weekend. And I'm someone who's always worked hard and got my work done on my schedule, right? Like, yes, I have deadlines, but there's time in which, it's flexibility on how I get those things done. And so now I don't have that control. And I'm like, this is bad. This is very bad for me.
I'm sure no one listening can really identify with this.
It was such a shock to my system, even though intellectually, you're like, okay, I'm going to work in the real world now, and this is what this looks like. But to be in it,
law school and law practices, I don't know if that's the real world. I mean, that whole, I mean, my father's an attorney, right? So I grew up in that, and I saw that whole idea of billable time, and you're beholden to the firm,
the machine.
It is not like other working environments, it just is a culture and society unto itself, right?
And I think then to your point, like growing up, and I grew up in the Midwest, you go to work and you come home at 5 and that's it, right? That's the world. And no one in my family worked in corporate America on that level. My mother had worked for the city for a while, but again, 5 o'clock, 5:30, you go home. We're done here. Okay. There's somebody's texting you or calling you at like 11. I need this thing. My family had worked in nonprofit space. They worked in academia. So it was a more fluid schedule predominantly. And so now I'm in this rigid environment and beholden to these crazy people. And I'm dreading Monday mornings. Sunday evening, I'm crying. I'm dreading the start of the week. And so now I'm no longer myself. Up until this point, super bubbly personality, got a lot of friends who would like to talk to me, hang out with me. My friends will call me at work. I'm yelling, I'm cussing. Like, I'm just like, this shit is terrible. And they're like, okay, what's happening to you? And I'm just no longer Crescent. And it's just having dark thoughts repeatedly.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry to hear that.
But again, the network, right? And so my other Black female lawyer friends, they were like, here's a therapist you need to go see.
Good.
And this is at the time when therapy was not widely talked about, right? That was a white thing. White people go see therapists. But Black women are not allowed to. Nope, we don't have time for that quote unquote weakness. And so it was very hush hush. And I was like, all right. But at that point, I was like, I need help. I'm no longer managing this on my own in any way that's making sense. I'm having just incredibly dark thoughts. And so I go see her, and it's funny because she also had worked in corporate America. And so she, thankfully, she gets it. And so she had her appointments later. Thank you, therapist, for having later appointments. Cause trying to take off from work in the middle of the day to go do therapy. What?
Yeah.
And so I go see her, and I started to tell her about everything that's going on. And within 10 minutes, I'm sobbing. I'm just like sobbing, trying to get the words out. And she goes, "You're depressed." I go, no, I'm not. Nope, don't have time for that. And she goes, okay. So I continue talking. And by the end of the session, she and I, again, giving credit. And I know you guys, therapists, you ask questions to get us to, give you, say the answer for ourselves. Well, this and this. But she was very direct. And she said, okay, I'm gonna repeat it again. You're depressed and you need to quit your job. I was like, now I know you're insane. I'm going to move in with you? Like, what are you talking about? And so I go to work
Did she say yes?
I know, right?
That might have been slightly unethical.
Yeah. Red flag.
Red flag.
Huge.
There's another manipulative relationship.
I know, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, yeah, come work for me. But no, she got it out. And I will say this, just getting the opportunity to say it.
Yeah.
To share, not fearing judgment was huge. Yes. And so I went home. No, you know what, guys? I went back to work because I had to close out some things. So the appointment was at 6, saw her for an hour. So 7:30, I go back to work, close out some things, go home.
Did you get in trouble for like going to a...
Shauna, you are on top of it. You are out there already. The next morning, I get to work and I get to work early. Yeah. I have an email from a mid-level associate, not even a partner, okay? Like a mid-level associate, because I'm a junior associate. I'm, first year. And that email says that I need to reschedule my doctor's appointments because they needed me last night. A doctor's appointment that I scheduled for 6 p.m. And do you want me to schedule it for midnight? I don't understand, right?
Yeah.
And immediately, it's, you have these moments of clarity. All the chaos and swirling thoughts that are in your head, every now and then, at least for me, there would be a moment when there's just clarity. And I had that moment. And I got up and I went to my partner's office and I said, I need to take a medical leave of absence. And because it's a law firm, they were like, oh, are you leaving right now? Like, what's going on? Like, they're like, okay.
Yeah. Got a cat and you've got watch their ass for sure.
Exactly. And so I go, no, I can finish out the week. Cause I think it was a Thursday at that point. I was like, I can finish, I'll finish today and tomorrow and close out things and get stuff off my plate and whatever. But then, I need to step back for a couple months. And that started my journey of healing.
So one of the things about your story that I want to have Margaret comment on, sometimes perfectly hidden depression is very nuanced and very hard for even that person to see. Right.
Yeah. But they've built a huge system to not see it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But particularly sometimes trauma and depression are hidden behind this mask of anger and irritability and just sort of like this fog of negativity. Can I get you to comment on that, Margaret, with your work and your background?
Well, my first thought, Shauna, is that that's another way of keeping people out of your personal life. If I present with a very angry, controlling, even aggressive kind of way of being, then you're not going to turn around and ask me, how are you or who are you? That is another way of controlling your environment to where you remain dominant, you remain in control. There are other people, of course, in this rubric that would fall much on the other side. They would never let you know they were angry. They keep control by keeping themselves under tight rein, keeping their emotions under, very, very rigid, tight rein. And so I think that, you're right. I mean, just like depression itself can present in many, many, many different ways. So can this more, I think you used the word before, nuanced, a different presentation of depression, which looks more like having it all together and being extremely successful. And then, but that is a very tightly held. And I'm so impressed, Crescent, that you were able to say, this is really wrong. And here I am trying to reach into myself and connect with something that's literally going to be my emotional survival. And I'm being told I can't do it. And so for you to have the wherewithal to be able to do that was incredible. Good for you.
Well, and as I continue to talk about it more now, it started with the law school process and me questioning then, was this the right space for me? Was this the right path for me? So by the time it's now legitimately affecting my health, I was so backed into a corner that I did not have a choice. And while I was still in law school, I remember I called my mother from the office around 11. This is when I was over the summer. It was a summer job. She was like, why are you there so late? I'm like, that's what this world looks like. And so I remember her saying, well, do something else. I was like, I'm glad you said that.
Okay. Come to think of that.
Right. And so fast forward to, I had to think through worst case scenario is I'm not working. Okay. Well, I do have a household I can go back to, right? At a minimum, I can do that. Now, granted, I don't want to do that because Harvard, UPenn, and I told Shauna, objectively speaking, I'm cute, right? Like I'm attractive. So I'm not allowed to not have it together. But when I was confronted with not just falling apart, but falling apart in the worst way possible, right? Like, and having, like I said, just and I'll just say it, like I had thoughts of suicide, and that terrified me. It terrified me because I thought, I was like, what would that do to my mother? What would that do to my friends? And so then I just had to say out loud, this job is not worth that.
No, is not who you are. I mean, I feel like you took the path that would have undone me if I had taken that path. And I almost did. Like I had a near miss on that because my dad's an attorney and he owns a law firm, and I was going to inherit the law firm. And, that was my path laid out before me, my plan. Mm-hmm. And I was studying for the LSAT. And I was like, why is this such a grind? Like, I feel so much friction. Like, and then I thought about the lifestyle and I thought about that thing, right? Now look, there are people for whom the law career is a great fit. My dad was one of them. He's done a beautiful job. It's his passion. He loves it. The long hours, no problem for a lot of people. That's a great fit. For me and you, it would not work. Right. And so then you think about this law firm, like if the law firm were a person, what kind of relationship did I just enter? Right. If you put that whole corporation up to a level of what sort of personality am I now engaged to? Mm-hmm. That doesn't work. That kind of controlling, I own you, right? Doesn't work for some of us.
Well, dragging it back into research, which may or may not be warranted. But by the way, I do want to say that, places like Penn and Stanford have come up with these ways there's the Penn face and the Stanford duck syndrome that I talk about in the book, that they're saying you don't have to look all put together just because you're smart enough, or I don't know, your parents paid the way in, I don't know, whatever, but you got in, and you don't have to, you can admit fear and you can connect being, you can admit feeling overwhelmed. It's kind of interesting that y'all both came from Harvard. And then you went to Penn. But there's a thing called, it's the most dangerous kind of perfectionism, and it's called socially prescribed perfectionism. And that's what you were confronting, Crescent, when you said, I need medical leave, because socially prescribed perfectionism means that your perfectionism is not in and of yourself. It's not like I need to do the best I can do. It's I have to have, I have to scan in my environment constantly to see what are the expectations of me, and I must meet or exceed those expectations all the time. And that means your children's, your spouses, your friends, your law firm. And what you said in that moment was, no, I don't. You pulled back, and that the suicidality of that, that's what, in fact, the research shows that this socially prescribed perfectionism has the most likelihood of creating suicidal ideation.
Interesting.
Suicides. Yeah.
Say more about that. Why is that, Margaret? Can you go deeper on that? What's the connection?
Well, I think it's because you are so out of control of your own life. It's like you're on a treadmill and you're not setting the incline and you're not setting the speed. And you have no idea when you're getting off, and you just have to keep on chugging and keep on working and keep on succeeding. And it's when you really think about the pain of that there's very little attention paid to what's this like for you,
right?
And you don't give that to yourself, nor are you actually, affirmed in that way. And that's a part of that. There's self-oriented perfectionism, other-oriented perfectionism, which are really, self-explanatory. And then this socially prescribed, which again is by far the most dangerous. And so when you're able, like you did, Crescent, to pull out of that, maybe that you did, Shauna, by not doing the law school thing. I don't know if your parents expected you to do that or whatever, then that
they did. They might have.
You both stepped out of that and said, I'm going to set my own incline and set my own speed. And I'm a perfectionist already. So I know I'm going to do well. I want to do well. I want to succeed, but not where I am constantly controlled by what other people think I should be doing.
One of the things I got from Harvard personally was this sense of like, if it can be envisioned, it can be achieved with enough hard work. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's like, I had one course in psychology in all of my undergrad. Okay. And I'm not proud to say it was my worst grade. Like my only class, I was like, this is going to be easy. And I didn't really apply myself, as the saying goes. And so I had that one course. And then when I said, I don't want to go to law school. I don't want this life. Regardless, like this isn't my path. Mm-hmm. I thought I have to do a lot of work. So I grabbed a bunch of books and I just read really like devotedly all of the studies that had ever been published that I could put my hands on in psychology. I took the advanced subject matter test. I got 2 jobs, one at MGH and one at Judge Baker Children's Center to make up for lost time. And then I applied to grad school knowing that I had to get scholarships to go through grad school because I wasn't going to take the path that was prescribed for me. And so it was just kind of like, all right, I have to come from way behind in the pack here. But Harvard helped me to feel like that can be done. It's just a matter of work. I'm not afraid of work. And so I think it's so brave, Crescent, that you realize that. I think for the grace of God, I could have gone down that same path and hit that same wall that you did. I think times of struggle are universal and human for all of us. And thank you for admitting that you've had those times. We've all had dark, dark times. And so part of this podcast series is about not dividing the world into patients and providers, but saying we've all had struggles. Acadiana Veteran Alliance is committed through their HEAL program to support veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress, to reduce their symptoms and improve overall quality of life through use of the stellate ganglion block medical procedure. AVA is fundraising to raise money to allow veterans to receive stellate ganglion block, or SGB, in combination with traditional therapies provided by therapists with expertise in trauma and veteran treatment to achieve long-term resolution of post-trauma symptoms. To donate, please visit Acadiana Veteran Alliance.
Margaret, when you were just describing, and Shauna, I do want to come back to like what Harvard does prepare you for. There's some things it doesn't prepare you for, but then there's other things that it does a really good job of preparing you for. But what you were describing, Shauna, Margaret, is for me, it was that sense of hopelessness and feeling, yes, I'm trapped and I don't know how to get out of this.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and even then, before I decided to take the medical leave of absence, but thankfully I knew that was a path, that was an option to sort of figure it out, at least take a moment to be able to step back and take some time to figure it out. But before then I was like, I can't go on a sabbatical. Again, these are things that white people do. These are the things that like people with money do. Like, I was just like, what does that look like? And again, I'll give it to the therapist. I'm pretty sure she was the one who said, okay, if you can't quit, try a medical leave of absence just so you can step back for a minute. And so being able to take that pause and just be, like, I took naps. I watched Little House on the Prairie on television. Like I walked.
Now that's a white person thing too.
I know, right? Yeah, but it's like I grew up in the 80s in the Midwest, so
okay, there you go.
Laura Ingalls and I super close. And that's the thing. Like it was being able to have a break, which I had not had. Right, like since I was probably 5, I had not had this just not scheduled time. Like I didn't have it, and so now I have the summer. And I'm finding peace again, but I have to go back to law, to the firm. I have to go back to work because I don't have any savings where I can just like, okay, I'm done with this and I'm out. And I was still trying to figure out the path forward. But what it helped me do was understand the situation. Like it helped me understand, okay, if I can have some element of control, then I can make it work. And as soon as I don't have any control, this is when I can't be in this environment. And so I made it another 9 months before I hit that wall again. And that's when I was like, okay, I have to leave. But in that span of time, I was trying to put together a plan to get myself out of there. And so I am grateful that it was a lesson I learned early. So I'm like mid-20s. And it's funny because there's a lot more conversations about mid-quarter life crisis. And I'm like, yeah, I did that. I was mid-20s, like, no, work-life balance. So I need that. That's a real thing that is needed, which I think is definitely being talked about more. But as soon as I was starting to feel that same feeling that I had like a year prior, I was like, okay, I don't want to do that again. Like, I don't want to get that far down the hole. And then just can't pull myself out of it. So I'm just going to leave. I'm going to leave. And I moved out to LA, and that's still a journey. It's like, I figured out the first step, which is like, this environment doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. Figuring out the best path forward is still in flux, but I'm a lot calmer now because I am aware of environments that are triggering, mm-hmm. People that are triggering. I've like I said, I ended up finally getting on medication, which has been enormously helpful. Mm-hmm. And again, I think people still, although again, I feel like younger millennials and Gen Z, they are on Twitter talking about, I talk to my therapist every day and this is my medication. But I think Gen X and up, it was a conversation we were not having. And I think
we didn't have that.
No,
we didn't look at ourselves. We didn't look at quality of life. We didn't look at work-life balance. This was the era in which you would go through Harvard recruiting and sign yourself up, enlist yourself into 60, 80, 100-hour work weeks for business, law, or medicine, typically in our class, so it's definitely before that. One of the things that, Margaret, you wrote about that I want to get to today, because I'm looking at the time and I just want to, this was one of the really insightful things in your book, Perfectly Hidden Depression, that I wanted to touch on. The thing that can keep a lot of people stuck is something that sounds good on paper, mm-hmm. which is count your blessings.
Oh,
now,
God, yeah.
A lot of people with perfectly hidden depression, as you point out, often will talk themselves out of it repeatedly, of getting help or looking at that deeply, by saying, well, I should count my blessings. Or they talk to the wrong person in a vulnerable moment, right? And that person says, well, count your blessings, right? So I want to have you both comment on that. First, Margaret, can you talk about that, how it can keep people stuck to do that? And then Crescent, I see your nonverbals and want to get your opinion on all of that.
Your Harvard colleague, Lisa David, who teaches there, I think she went there, but anyway, she calls this a tyranny of positivity. She has a book called Emotional Agility.
I love that.
The term toxic positivity has been around for a while, but she calls it a tyranny of positivity. And she tells this story in her TEDx about how her father was dying, and that, but she didn't really know when he was going to die. She would just, before school, go and kiss him goodbye and go off to school and be perfect and make perfect grades and look like she was fine. And she didn't know her dad would be alive when she got home. And this happened over a long period of time.
Wow.
And she was lucky enough to go to a class where the teacher gave them these notebooks and said, write what you really feel. And she said, she was sort of aghast at first, like, I'm not supposed to say, oh, everything's fine and everything's good. And she said she really began writing, and her teacher would respond. And that was for her this seminal moment of, what am I doing? This is the way I really feel. I'm scared. I'm lost. I'm confused. I'm mad. I'm pressured. I'm smiling. Why am I smiling? It was, and so I think it really colored her whole life's work. And what I talk about in the book, because I hadn't discovered Lisa David yet, was that there is this sense of, it is that, and she does talk about this, there are positive emotions and there are negative or dark emotions that if you're living and you're full of gratitude, and which is a good thing, being grateful is a good thing, but that's where you stay. And you don't allow yourself to connect with what is harder, with what is scarier, with what is more ambiguous, with that, but in my own 30 years as a clinician, and certainly in my own professional life and personal life, I mean, that I know that if you know that you have the skill to feel sad, to feel afraid, to feel really pissed off, and you can handle it and you can tolerate, and you don't aggress, or you don't quick kick the squirrel. I mean, I've never been able to kick a squirrel. They're a lot faster than if I was going to pick something to kick, I'd pick something really slow.
And they're scary. They might bite back. So, you know.
Lift that tail at you. But anyway, it's and if we want to say very conservative religions often are, hugely preach this. If you're not appreciating what God's given you, then you're wrong and you're going to go to hell and that kind of thing. So obviously people from those backgrounds really have a tough time, but generally speaking, it's still very prevalent in our culture. And what Dr. David has said, Lisa David has said, is that, it's getting so prevalent. It's getting such an innate,
aggressively positive.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so, I have used this metaphor with my own patients that, if you have a palette and you're an artist and you want to paint, would you rather have, would you just want pastels, or would you want to sometimes be able to take black and slash the paint with black or color? And some people will look at me and go, oh, no, I'll be fine with pastels. And I think, well, then how would you, so your daughter dies. So how are you going to paint that? So you lose your job. How are you going to paint that?
Yeah.
Well,
I love that. Because otherwise it's a socially prescribed emotional experience. Exactly. It's another form of control.
Exactly. And so, as y'all were talking, I thought about my own life, and I was a rebel. I didn't do what y'all did. I been to a nice school and was Phi Beta Kappa. And like you said, Lisa, I was very comfortable in my mental world. And then I became a professional singer and sang in nightclubs. And I remember I opened for the belly dancer at this Greek place. I remember my parents sitting out and going, why did we pay for college for 4 years?
That is amazing.
But I want to say that you can get stuck in those kinds of choices as well. That becomes then another environment for that social prescription. That I became someone for a while who was very locked down. And so now this is who I need to be. And I absorbed these things around me and sort of expected myself to be that. So I found my freedom in going to towards something more, quote unquote, traditional, not that therapy is necessarily traditional, but it was again, sort of saying, I've got to free myself up from these expectations that I must make it in the music business. And so, because it was killing me. And so, there are lots of ways you can get stuck, not necessarily in the Harvards or the Stanfords of the world, or the law firms of the world, but in feeling like once you've made a choice, you have to make it the right choice. And it's going to be the way you need to live your life for the rest of your life. And that can be a prison no matter what it is.
Right. That your life needs to spin on that axis,
right.
Even when you have plenty of evidence in your own heart and your mind that it's not the right thing for you. It's not your path. Crescent, what are your thoughts on any of what we're talking about here?
Well, I wanted to say, actually thank you to Margaret for making that broader note, is that feeling like this is the path I chose and I can't move off of it, whatever it is. Because that's what, and, in reading a few of the stories that you shared in your book and on the different the YouTube videos that I watched, and how people, are keeping up this particular facade. Yep. And going into, and not having that freedom, not feeling like they have that freedom to be honest about what is happening to them in that particular moment. And even though I got myself out of that environment, I still didn't share like my truth. Because again, I didn't have that language. I didn't have that confidence then. And I'm already now dealing with people like, oh my God, you're not a lawyer anymore. You stepped away from being to do what? Right? Like that judgment. And in the midst of all that, again, the only thing that I would take myself back to is I'm the only person living my life. I am the only one. So you can think what you want about it, but you're not paying my bills. I'm not in your household, right? Like I'm not beholden to you for any, excuse my language, fucking thing. So I have to make the best decisions for Crescent. And then of course, to the extent that I expand that into like, for my mother, for like my immediate family, sure. But I got to start here because if I'm not well, then nothing's going to work. And so that whole like, the gratitude thing, just kind of to touch on that for a second. And it's so funny when people ask, how are you? Right? Like that is such a natural question. We all ask it, right? Like out the gate, how are you? And lately, as like within the last, I don't know, couple of years, I'll go, yeah, I'm not having a good day. I'm just not.
Yeah.
But then now I'm prepared for people to kind of pause. Or because it throws you off, right? Like it's like because you weren't expecting that. But for the longest, hey, I'm not actually a bad actress. Okay, you would not have known, right? The perfectly hidden depression. Like I'm dealing with it. I'm being honest with myself about it, but I'm not being honest with anyone outside of my immediate circle about it. And it was that too became too much of a burden. I'm like, okay, you know what? This is exhausting to continue to keep up this fucking facade. Like I'm tired, and so I just got better about just being honest. Like, you know what? Not a good day. Just not having a good day.
I found that too, Crescent, because I had panic disorder. I've had panic disorder since I was in my late 20s. I was diagnosed and I've had anorexia and I've been divorced twice and all this stuff. But anyway, when I try to tell people that I have performance anxiety, that I have social anxiety, I have panic disorder, they will look at me and say, no, you don't.
Oh my God.
No, you don't. What are you talking about? And I'm looking at them saying, yes, I do. And you ought to see me up there shaking and trembling and then so, it is just such a strange thing we do when what seems to be or what we project onto other people, what we need them to be, I need you to feel up. I need you to, and so they just like, there's this veil that they will not see the real you when you try to tell them.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, and it helps you, for me, it made me very much aware of who I could share with and who I could not. And just being cognizant of that, because if I decided to share and then the response from you is something not supportive, now I'm either spiraling again or now I'm angry. Like, and so again, in terms of like control, I'm gauging it out the gate. Like, okay, what environment am I in, and what is safe to share in this space?
Maybe a phase, though. I mean, I think that is true for sure. But I think what you're also talking about, Crescent, if I'm hearing you, is transcending even that.
Yeah.
In some of the interactions, right? So that's a phase of like, who is emotionally safe? Who is my tribe? Who is my inner core unit that I trust? And then beyond that, who cares? Right?
Yeah.
When you get beyond that, it's like, no, it's not a good day. And how they deal with that, and whether it throws people a little bit or they know how to respond right away or whatever, is not only like the truth, it's also empowering to you. And it changes that conversation one person at a time. Yeah. When we step out and encourage and speak the truth.
How do you experience that, Shauna? How do you experience it? Or maybe you don't, but my guess would be that people make all kinds of assumptions about you and how you seem and disregard or just detach from when you say, I have my struggles too, or whatever.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I'm always saying human struggles are universal. So talking about, performance anxiety, that one hits home for me. I give a lot of talks, and a lot of times I can't help but break out in hives before I give a major keynote. I hate it. It's like my skin shows up all red and blotchy on the stage. I've got videos of me on live TV over many years It's like, when does this stop?
Yeah.
There was one episode, one episode of TV where I did it was about wired tight caffeine use in the veteran population. I've never had energy drinks. I don't need the energy. My husband will say, have you had more than one coffee? Because you're kind of like a little intense today. So I can't even hide it when I have more than a cup of coffee. And my friend on live TV gave me, on purpose, by planning, a couple of energy drinks, which I drank on live TV. And then my whole face turned absolutely beet red. I happened to be wearing a red coat. It was just, I looked like a giant strawberry. I wanted to like throat punch everybody, cuss everybody out, and run off the stage. And like, that's on YouTube somewhere,
Oh God.
So like going through these experiences or having that kind of anxiety and then talking about it and having people go, oh no, you're so comfortable talking to huge groups of people, giving keynotes. Yes, I like it at the end when I'm done. But no, I don't like it right before. But it's like I have to go through that and be honest about it, or I feel like I'm betraying a part of myself. But yeah, absolutely agree with everything you're saying about how hard it is to have those different kind of conversations and have people see you and hear you.
Yeah.
Because of the public persona, perhaps, that people think of, oh, Doc Springer or whatever, So really appreciate this, sincere and genuine conversation.
Well, and one thing that's, because I've finally gotten comfortable talking publicly about all my journey, I'll say, is this, I'm going to say recent slate of, but I feel like we are becoming more aware of people committing suicide. It was the Judd, is Naomi Judd, who just recently, and there's been other sort of higher level celebrities. Let's just not say higher level, but celebrities, people really well known who are committing suicide, and it's taken me back a bit just because I'm like, to think that the hopelessness, right, and the feeling like they didn't have anyone to talk to, that they could not figure out how to get out of it. And so for me, it's gotten to where if I can just help one person realize, like, okay, there's another way. There's some options. Like, ask for help. Keep asking for help.
Yep.
Then that's what's propelling me. Even when I have the anxiety about talking about it and the fear, I push through because I'm like, I'm still here and I'm still asking for help. And I want that, for people. And I tell people I fought hard for this freedom to just exist.
Yep.
And if I never get another achievement again in life, so what? I'm amazing. I don't care. But I want people to be able to get there and to ask for help.
That's the bigger picture, isn't it? I mean, when Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain died, that was kind of like
close together,
2 in a row. And then, there have been so many other losses of people that are heroes and admired by so many since then that, one of the really big messages that I really want to push out there is that suicidal thoughts are human struggles and affect all of us at different times in our lives potentially. And we never know, if that perfect storm will come. For you, Crescent, the perfect storm was breakup and being in a law corporation where you didn't own your own time or your sense of self for that period of time in your life. So that was a perfect storm for you. I think there's a value in this conversation. And that's the bigger thing that drives me at core, is to really be brave, change conversations, bring people on that are similarly brave, that are willing to say, hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so, or I'm Crescent that's accomplished all these amazing things, and I've struggled. And trauma affects all of us. We often conceal from others the trauma in our lives, and sometimes trauma hides itself from us. We're grateful to Dr. Margaret Rutherford and Crescent Muhammad for coming on this episode, for sharing so vulnerably about their own traumas. Trauma affects all of us, and it's time we start lifting the veil. Post-traumatic stress is not a life sentence. Trauma can be healed with the right insights, the right treatments, and the right support. The story of our trauma is presented by Stella. Visit www.stellacenter.com to learn more about Stella's breakthrough trauma treatments. Please share this episode with people you care about who have been impacted by trauma. And remember to subscribe on Spotify and other streaming platforms.